The grand mansion trembled amidst the clash of swords. Inside, a woman knelt, praying ceaselessly. She implored the all-knowing and merciful Para to embrace her painlessly and finally release her from this world. Edel Lancaster clung to her faith in divine providence, determined to endure. But the doors had long been broken down, and the brief pain, like the whisper of the wind, had left its mark. Yet patience did indeed bear sweet fruit. The knights, ordered to capture her, were down to the last room. The doors splintered, and Edel saw a sea of knights, led by a man in a crimson cloak. She sat calmly in the center of the room, awaiting them, without a trace of fear in her eyes. The knights chuckled. The rumors were true. The woman was indeed a beauty. Even in this chaos, she carried herself like a duchess. The man in the crimson cloak addressed her as Duchess Edel Lancaster. His dark hair was cropped short, and a faint stubble lined his jaw. Edel, in a detached and indifferent tone, asked if he intended to execute her on the spot. But the Count, under the Emperor's orders, had to take her alive. Sitting on the dilapidated chair, Edel admitted her crimes. She wondered when everything had begun to unravel. She pondered the honor and pride of the nobility. For such trivial matters, Edel had endured all this foolish behavior, but even death was not her own to decide. 3 years ago, she had been the admired and flawless Miss Edel Lancaster, then briefly the Duchess Lancaster. The ladies had found the match repulsive. The Lancaster family was one of the 4 most powerful families in the empire, but marrying an old duke was dreadful, the nobles had gossiped. But Edel remained unfazed. Most people didn't know what she was truly thinking. The empire had 4 immensely powerful families, and Edel had been raised from childhood to marry into one of them. Now she had finally fulfilled her purpose. Who could have imagined Edel becoming the link between 2 families? But the Duke's treacherous schemes had made her a traitor's wife. Now, the Emperor was thrilled, finally able to seize the ultimate spoils of this war. The Duke's second wife was now at his mercy. Her entire life had been cultivated for a single purpose. Edel collapsed, too frightened to run, unable to bear even the thought of dying on the floor. So she dragged over an old chair and sat down. The nobles eagerly petitioned His Majesty to hand the female traitor over to them. They suggested a duel to decide the prisoner's fate, so someone could have the beauty and let the old widower off easy. It seemed no one here had any dignity left. Now, Edel Lancaster was nothing more than a slave. The great Emperor DeMarcus Tuberin raised his crystal glass of fine red wine and roared with laughter. He had almost forgotten the leading contributor to quelling the rebellion. The Emperor asked Laszlo if he wanted her. If Count Krisis desired her, the Emperor could give him the greatest prize of this war. But the man's expression remained stern. Miss Edel had married the wrong man, and now she was ruined. People didn't understand why the Emperor wanted to give the greatest prize of the war to a commoner. As Edel recalled, the Count had once been a mercenary, but now he looked no different from the other knights. Laszlo Krisis ran the empire's largest mercenary guild. He was the one who became a count at the age of 27 through military achievements. To the great empire and the old nobility, Laszlo was the biggest threat among the emperor's new nobles. He was seen as the most dangerous figure. However, the nobles who regarded mercenaries as scum looked down on him, treating him like dirt. Now, Laszlo was staring at the prisoner with icy eyes. Edel looked away. The Count told His Majesty that he would not accept the offer. Edel's eyes widened when he nonchalantly added that his estate was short of maids. The Emperor burst into laughter at the thought of Laszlo turning a former duchess into a maid. But the Count had no better use for her. DeMarcus Tuberin approved. Before everyone, he handed Edel Lancaster over to Count Laszlo Krisis as a maid. Was this the end? Was this the reward for all her endurance? Edel's mother had told her not to argue with her father, but the girl didn't want to marry a man older than her father. Her mother explained that there was no better match. The man already had a mistress and grown children. After his death, Edel would inherit a fortune. But Edel didn't understand at all. Becoming the duchess of one of the empire's most powerful families would give her immense power. Even her own father would have to bow to her. Edel's eyes widened. She begged her father to listen to her, but he considered it a disgrace that his daughter didn't want to fight for the family, which had gone to great lengths to make this happen. Thinking of all the Count had done for someone as useless as her, tears welled up in Edel's eyes. But this was her only way out, to escape a man like him, to leave Count Canning's house forever. This thought alone sustained her. She had to endure the ridicule and spiteful words behind her back, trapped managing dozens of ledgers and hundreds of servants, but she persevered. Edel received guests daily, hosting endless receptions without blinking an eye. Every time, she played her part with a smile, all for that one chance at freedom, until the butler rushed in, urging her to run. It was then that Edel saw the Imperial army approaching, realizing the secret plan had been exposed. Our heroine rushed down the vast, empty corridor, the servants nowhere in sight. It dawned on her, then, that she was nothing more than bait to stall the knights. She had dreamed of a different life, one filled with warmth and genuine human connection. But no matter how much Edel gave to this duchy, only the butler told her to run. She had become the perfect lady her father had always wanted. Perhaps all the suffering was heaven's will. They called her a prize, but at her core, she was a slave, even though the Empire had abolished slavery centuries ago. Duke Lancaster's daughters were furious that she still maintained her aristocratic demeanor. The eldest daughter, Lady Lorraine, loathed this haughty woman. Her younger sister, Edel Lancaster, snapped that she had been like this from day one. They were convinced Edel's former mother-in-law had been secretly helping Count Canning all along, while Edel could only sit there and endure it. The girl called her an ungrateful wretch. Hearing mockery was nothing new, but such blatant rudeness from the Duke's daughters was surely a first. They simply tired of their tirade and stopped. Edel didn't want to waste her energy on pointless arguments. Guards always had their moments of laxity, so the heroine had to gather her strength for death. At least, death was better than being a pawn. Count Krisis had said he would make her his servant, but a young prisoner couldn't expect decent treatment from someone more powerful than her. Despite Edel being a prisoner, they kept her in a decent cell, but she still ached all over and her head throbbed. The heroine decided to sleep for a while, hoping a good idea would come to her upon waking. She had to figure out how to end her life. Night passed, and the sun rose once more from behind the castle's towering spires and thick stone walls. Edel slowly opened her eyes and sat up. Despite her exhaustion, she woke at her usual time. By the Emperor's orders, the heroine was finally to be handed over to Count Krisis today, so she had to find a way to die quickly, making this the last morning of her life. The blue light filtering through the cell window seemed to bid her farewell, casting a soft glow within the cold stone chamber. The sky was breathtakingly beautiful today. For a convicted criminal, her last meal was lavish. When the Duke's daughters were ordered to leave the dungeon, the heroine silently prayed they would survive this ordeal. Then, the guard stepped aside, allowing Edel to emerge. Even in her final moments, she held her head high, stepping out of the cell and into the sunlight. The heroine made up her mind. She would jump from the carriage, and, if she were lucky, she would die instantly. The heroine had been hoping for a novice servant, so she could carry out her plan flawlessly, but all hope vanished when Edel saw the Count himself. Now she finally understood how helpless she was. The ornate carriage, adorned with intricate carvings and gleaming metalwork, was speeding down the road. Laszlo stood there with his arms crossed, gazing out the window. She hadn't expected him to show up personally. She had assumed he would just send someone with her, perhaps trying to talk to her later. She was certain he couldn't stand her. The Count suddenly took off his red coat and tossed it to the heroine. She didn't know why he did that, so Laszlo told her to stop shivering. Edel hadn't even realized she was clutching herself. She began to think that if she threw the coat at him, she might buy herself a few seconds to jump from the speeding carriage. Then, under the wheels of some passing carriage, it would all be over. The sound of another carriage approaching could already be heard. She decided to jump on the count of 3 and began counting down in her head. But the Count said coldly, "Don't even think about it." Edel was stunned. The man knew everything. That was why he was in the carriage with her. Now, the heroine was certain he wouldn't let her go. At dusk, they reached their destination. Laszlo was the first to step out of the carriage. Edel gazed at the place that would become her new hell, where she would be trapped from now on. The Count watched her, waiting for her to disembark. Edel took a step and immediately felt a sharp pain in her ankle. The young woman lost her balance and started to fall, unable to steady herself, but she didn't hit the ground. Edel didn't immediately realize she was in his arms. Laszlo had caught her, which was unexpected and unsettling for the former Duchess. Her eyes widened. She had been raised to believe a lady should always maintain decorum, and falling into a man's arms was highly improper. She quickly pulled away, hoping the Count wouldn't misunderstand, and swiftly apologized. Laszlo abruptly withdrew his hand. He strode toward the manor, snapping, "Follow me." Laszlo walked inside and barked at the housekeeper. "Was everything all right while I was gone?" A woman's voice immediately interjected, the housekeeper confirming that everything at the manor was fine. Nothing to worry about. Edel raised an eyebrow. Where had the butler gone? The Count remembered she was short-staffed, so he brought some helpers and told her to assign them as needed. But first, she must freshen up and rest in the designated room. Work could begin tomorrow. Edel blinked. Why hadn't she received the sleep with me command? It turned out he had actually hired her as a maid. A maid named Mina ran to Lady Botchin, whispering that she had received some news from the knights. It turned out she was the infamous Duchess of Lancaster. The maid's eyes widened in shock. Who would have thought they would have a living, breathing Duchess under their employ? Lady Bo-hyun quickly ordered Mina to take the woman to the furthest room. Meanwhile, the housekeeper began to ponder where to place such a cutie. They were quite kind, providing edible food and even a change of clothes. Now, Edel was trapped, living in a small room, the entire situation indicating she was no longer a noble. Edel felt a biting cold. She figured the servants here probably didn't have hot water. Even in the harshest winter, she would have to wash with cold water. It was strange. The Count's finances shouldn't be that bad, right? But Edel decided not to dwell on it for now. It was better to focus on her new life. It was somewhat surprising and ironic that despite the mess, Edel still found the food delicious. Edel hadn't thought she would be able to eat fruit again. The former Duchess would rather die than become some man's plaything, the object of his dirty fantasies. Perhaps she would get lucky, and Count Krisis would leave her alone. Edel just wanted to live peacefully, savoring the sweetness of the fruit. But whether she could truly live a humble life as an ordinary maid remained to be seen. For now, Edel had to survive, and perhaps then her soul could finally find peace. An advisor reported to His Majesty with a grave expression, stating that Count Krisis had taken the prisoner today, but His Majesty wasn't surprised at all. He was curious to hear the advisor's opinion on the matter. DeMarcus Tuberin asked if Count Krisis seemed satisfied, but the advisor nervously admitted he wasn't sure. No one had ever doubted Laszlo's true nature. He made a deal with the Emperor and joined the Imperial Guard. Although Laszlo joined purely for the reward, his mercenaries had won countless battles, so the Emperor allowed him to claim anything he desired. But Laszlo said he only wanted the rewards stipulated in their contract. That fearless and arrogant edge made him the perfect candidate to be the Emperor's loyal hound. But to tame a hound, you need the perfect bait. A title alone wasn't enough. As soon as Laszlo became a count, all the nobles began whispering, annoyed by the king's choice. They didn't understand the ruler's move. At that party, Laszlo was the protagonist no one wanted to deal with. But the Emperor noticed the Count's gaze locked on the same woman all night. All night, undoubtedly, it was Edel Lancaster. The die had been cast, and now all they could do was wait and see. Laszlo was furious. He couldn't understand the Emperor's ploy, and honestly, he never thought he'd be involved with the Duchess. He accepted the title to secure a good marriage for his sister. Despite Laszlo's sudden elevation to nobility, the ridicule stemming from his commoner and mercenary background hadn't disappeared. He was well aware of how the marriage market would perceive him. After observing for a while, Laszlo realized the noble's marriage game was truly disgusting. But Edel Lancaster, even when being sold off to some mad old man, wore a smile, offering no resistance, no fuss. Perhaps the woman was simply after power, selling her youth for opportunity. But somehow, Laszlo couldn't take his eyes off her. They still hadn't spoken a word to each other. It wasn't that they'd had the chance to, given Edel's noble birth and his not. But now, the woman was his maid. The Emperor's move was likely just a warning. If Laszlo hadn't taken her in, the woman would have been sold off or taken her own life. But while everyone else fled, Edel was left alone at the estate. Count Canyon, in an attempt to save himself, ultimately severed ties with his children. The Duchess, abandoned by both the duchy and her own family, still couldn't bring herself to die. Laszlo just couldn't understand the lengths nobles would go to in order to protect themselves. Whatever it took, as long as he kept her by his side, she would be useful. The next morning arrived. Lady Bohyun tossed the laundry back into the basin, sarcastically asking the former Duchess if this was how they did laundry in her luxurious mansion. Edel looked at her, bewildered. She promised to do better. Lady Bohyun snapped at her subordinate. Seely, did you teach our new maid properly? Keep an eye on Edel like a hawk and teach her well. She's a Lancaster traitor, and the Count must have something up his sleeve by taking her in. But Seely wasn't sure things would go smoothly. The housekeeper asked if she was afraid the dead Duke's ghost would come looking for his poor wife, then cackled and barked orders at the other servants. Now Edel understood what the housekeeper meant yesterday. It seemed she was trying to assert her authority, grinding the former mistress's noble status under her heel. Lady Bohyun had been like this ever since she introduced herself to the servants. She was probably waiting for her to break. As soon as the housekeeper left, Seely let out a shaky breath. Edel noticed that Seely thought the woman was crazy for bringing up dead people. Edel figured out that Seely was in charge of laundry and guessed she felt awkward teaching her. Edel decided to finish the laundry quickly before the housekeeper found another excuse to pick on her. The priority was to deal with what was in front of her. Edel could handle the teasing, but the real problem was something else entirely. She wondered how much longer her body could hold out. At Count Canyon's estate, a teacup fell to the floor and shattered. Count Canyon started yelling at his daughter, calling her a good-for-nothing waste of space. William asked his father what they should do now that Edel had become that mercenary spoils of war. But the Count demanded they stop mentioning that useless girl. Before that, he had to plead with his majesty to believe that Duke Lancaster had threatened them into aiding the treason. The Duke had controlled Edel against her will, and as her father, the Count couldn't refuse. The Emperor thought that if he kept insisting she was innocent, he shouldn't have any complaints about his daughter's fate. The Count readily agreed. Once Edel was married off, she no longer belonged to their family. Dustin knelt and begged, not only handing over the duchy's secrets, but also half his damned fortune, all the while burning with humiliation. DeMarcus was born of the Tübingen bloodline in the Empire. He ascended the throne after his irresponsible father, rallying the commoners to solidify his power. So, yes, the backstabber was willing to do whatever it took. In the end, he turned that useless little girl into some bastard mercenary's plaything. The Emperor ruined the Canyon family's reputation as a warning to the other nobles. From the very beginning, His Majesty had planned to use the powerful Dustin to humiliate his entire damned family. The Count ordered his sons to keep a low profile and not draw attention to themselves. Attention, but Dustin was determined to rise again. On a bright day, Edel went outside to hang the freshly laundered clothes on the line, enjoying the breeze. Suddenly, someone called out to her. She turned around, and a familiar voice invited her to join them. It was Seely and Layla. This was a huge surprise for the former Duchess, as she hadn't expected anyone here to be kind to her. They were headed in the same direction, so the girls offered to help. In the end, they hung the clothes together. 10 days ago, the protagonist stepped into this mansion, and since then, her life had completely changed. One might be curious about what she'd been doing here. Edel was a laundress, and she worked extremely hard, even boasting about it. Therefore, the protagonist was used to doing laundry. The only problem was the unreasonably picky housekeeper who mocked the former mistress. She was always dissatisfied with the results of the washing. One day, Seely decided to step in and defend Edel. She declared that for a newbie still getting used to the hard work, the results were absolutely commendable. So the laundry supervisor told the housekeeper to mind her own business. The housekeeper opened her mouth to protest, but Seely quickly shut her down. Edel just stood there dumbfounded, a little bewildered watching the whole exchange. Seely, without a word, grabbed a dirty rag and threw it at the housekeeper. "Go ahead, you try it." The woman scurried away, but muttered under her breath that she'd be watching. Ethel blurted out, "Seely, are you all right?" She said she did it for everyone's sake. The housekeeper's incessant nitpicking was driving them all crazy. Edel, ever the hero, thanked her. Seely assured her things would calm down in a few days. Mountains of laundry piled up in the laundry room, and the supervisor yelled at everyone to get back to work. A thought hit Edel like a jackhammer. The maids were always suffering because of her. She couldn't even talk to them, didn't know what they were thinking, so Edel could only pray they weren't too upset. Perhaps the laundry maids were simply too busy to think about anyone else. The work was hard. Her own hands were developing calluses. For 10 whole days, Count Laszlo hadn't sought out Edel, as if he'd completely forgotten her existence within his mansion. Fortunately for her, She could live like an ordinary maid. She was grateful, even happy to have escaped the Duke's mansion. Tomorrow meant another day of heavy chores, so she didn't waste any time and climbed straight into bed. She just hoped these peaceful nights would last, and that she'd get another apple tomorrow. Suddenly, Edel heard footsteps heading straight for her door. It was late, and panic began to set in. What if the Count had changed his mind? The footsteps stopped right outside her door. Edel froze, her heart pounding. She blurted out, "Who's there?" Her voice trembled. A soft knock came on the door, and a voice called through it. "It's Daisy from next door. Can I come in? I wanted to talk to you." Daisy, it turned out, was the youngest maid in the entire mansion. Edel hesitated, then unlocked the door. Daisy waved her hand dismissively. "It's nothing serious. I just wanted to give you something." It was a salve and cream for sore muscles. Edel hesitantly asked why she was giving this to her. The young maid said she heard her groaning in pain every night after her hard work. The walls here were paper thin, and she lived right next door. Daisy had also heard Lady Bohun mocking Edel. The former noblewoman clearly wasn't used to working, so it must be incredibly painful to be sore all the time. So Daisy just wanted to give her some medicine. In Edel's world, no one ever did anything without an ulterior motive. Daisy smiled as she handed the medicine to Edel and squeezed her hand in support. Who would have thought such a young girl could be so thoughtful? It turned out there were still pure, genuine hearts in this world. Edel awkwardly thanked Miss Daisy, and the girl immediately flustered, exclaimed that she should just call her Daisy. Edel then told her to call her by her first name as well. Daisy shyly asked if she could call her sister. Edel clutched the gifted ointment to her chest and nodded, a warm, genuine smile blooming on her face. The young maid offered to massage her back and shoulders, and Edel hesitantly agreed. If Edel had a diary, she would definitely write about her new friend today. The next morning, just as Celia had said, Edel's breakfast was meager, and the laundry maids weren't surprised at all. The portion of soup was halved. There was, however, a bread roll, and they were given fruit. Thanks to Daisy's all-natural, pain-relieving ointment, the physical discomfort had lessened somewhat. Edel had often been forced to go hungry to maintain her figure before, so this wasn't so bad. At that moment, the Count was engrossed in reading a new letter. With every word he read, his expression grew more serious, as if sinking deeper into his thoughts. He ordered her to be brought to the guest room immediately. She followed the butler. Edel was startled by the sudden summons, but reminded herself there would be people present, so nothing bad could happen to her. The door slowly creaked open. The girl had only hoped for a good day that morning. Extremely anxious, Edel entered the enormous drawing room and immediately announced her arrival to the Count. She asked why she had been summoned. The Count gestured to the seat opposite him, telling her to sit. Whenever Edel was in Count Laszlo's presence, she felt a suffocating sense of oppression. She didn't resist, immediately doing as he said. Laszlo asked if she knew the Dowager Marchioness Barbara Celestine. The unexpected question took Edel by surprise. She was actually friends with the Marchioness. But Edel didn't understand why he'd suddenly bring this up. Laszlo narrowed his eyes and asked again, asking if they knew each other. Edel decided it was best not to mention their friendship, so she told the Count they had only shared tea a few times. The man said the tea must have been delicious for a dignified lady to send a desperate letter to a mad mercenary. The heroine asked loudly and emotionally if it was truly the Marchioness's letter. Only then did she realize she should control her emotions. The Count's gaze sharpened. He handed the letter to the former Duchess. Edel, trembling with excitement, took it. In the letter, Barbara pleaded with the Count not to push Lady Edel into deeper despair, claiming she knew nothing of her husband's plans. Many people abandoned the heroine after she was no longer the Duchess. This was natural, as the accusations against her were very serious. However, Marchioness Barbara sincerely believed in her innocence and worried about her, which the heroine hadn't expected at all. Unexpectedly, Edel felt kindness here. Now, she received comfort from an old friend. The heroine felt genuine solace from her dear friend and could barely contain her emotions. But it was unclear what Count Laszlo was thinking. He might think Barbara was supporting the Duke and the anti-imperialists. Edel calmly explained to the Count that there was no connection between their families, and this friendship was purely personal, so she asked him not to misunderstand the letter. Laszlo thought everyone must see him as some kind of monster. The heroine realized with horror that her careless words had hurt the Count and nervously apologized. Laszlo watched her intently. The Count pointed pointed out that she was trembling as if he were about to chop someone's head off right now. Realizing what he had just said, the man knew he shouldn't have mentioned that in front of her. The heroine couldn't hide her shock, her eyes wide as she stared at him. She had never seen the Count with such an expression. Edel couldn't believe he actually looked guilty. Laszlo knew that in her eyes, he was just the man who captured and beheaded the Duke of Lancaster's eldest daughter. Perhaps she saw him as a heartless monster. The Count didn't know how he let it slip. He was just curious why the Dowager Marchioness Celestine needed it, but ended up being too abrupt. Laszlo had no idea what she was thinking at that moment. The heroine read the letter again. Then she calmly said that the Count needn't worry. He was merely following the king's orders, fulfilling his duty, and had won the victory. But Laszlo didn't understand how she could say such a thing so calmly. There wasn't a trace of hatred in the former Duchess. On the contrary, no matter how many hardships life brought her, her eyes still burned with bright hope and faith in a better future. Lady Edel was indeed worthy of the title of Duchess. Unlike her, Laszlo had only earned the title of Count. This beautiful and well-educated woman had nothing in common with him, who had remained unchanged since then. Laszlo realized that he felt ashamed at that moment. He told the young woman that he would write back. His excuse didn't matter anyway. A happy smile bloomed on the heroine's face. Laszlo froze for a few seconds, then added, "Be sure to write that I won't treat you as society expects." Edel stared at him in confusion, not knowing what to say, and simply thanked him. Laszlo was angered by the rumors. How could people think he would do such a despicable thing to his sister? It was too cruel for someone who hadn't even held a woman's hand, especially since Edel was so fragile, like a wounded bird. She tried to act strong, but she wasn't. The woman would panic if touched by an ordinary mercenary, so Laszlo vowed never to hurt her. Edel pressed the letter to her chest and thanked him sincerely again. She didn't even notice how shocked the Count was. Edel said they had done a good job today. They walked back to their rooms with Daisy, who was shivering from the cold water. It seems this mansion has never had hot water. The girl said goodbye at the door. As soon as the heroine entered the room, she saw the pen and paper on the desk and was surprised. Even so, those words were sincere. When Edel asked for pen and paper, the Count told her to just ask for such things. The heroine rushed to the desk with a beaming smile, already starting to think about how to begin writing. But the letter would likely be inspected, so she couldn't write as freely as before. Edel placed a candle beside her and picked up the pen. She still remembered how they met 7 years ago. It was at Countess Ladrick's tea party, and all the ladies were shocked by the arrival of the Dowager Marchioness Celestine. Edel curiously asked, "What's the deal with that Marchioness?" It turned out the Countess and the Marchioness were mortal enemies. The heroine blurted out, "Wait, then why did they invite her?" But no one had time to answer, as the announcer loudly proclaimed, "The Dowager Marchioness Celestine has arrived." Then Edel saw her for the first time. The woman paused for a moment, assessing the situation, then swept her sharp gaze over everyone present. Until then, Edel had never heard the click-clack of high heels. The Dowager Marchioness Celestine limped on one leg, possibly with a prosthetic. Without a doubt, Edel was terrified. The hall amplified the sound of footsteps more than any other room, which was precisely why they had invited the Marchioness. You couldn't just exploit someone's weakness, even if you didn't know your place in her life. Edel rushed to the Marchioness's side and quickly fabricated a story about how the lady had helped her fix a broken carriage wheel in town. The Marchioness brushed off her thanks and walked away. Barbara watched the young lady with wide eyes. One lady commented on how noble and admirable it was for the Marchioness to be so kind. Edel prayed her performance looked convincing. She needed her exaggerated excitement to cover up the awkward sound and the sudden silence. The Marchioness took her hand, a warm smile on her face, and with a playful tone, a hint of teasing, said she was persistent. At that time, Edel felt incredibly proud of herself for helping an elderly lady in need. Soon, the ladies began gossiping about how Viscountess Oberon had finally decided to end her marriage. The main rumor was about her side business, but some ladies thought she might have another man. Edel suddenly realized how much easier it was to slander someone in high society than she had imagined. The Dowager Marchioness Celestine slammed her teacup on the table. Barbara, arms crossed, muttered sharply that the gossip these days was unbearable compared to her time. She asked, why was it such a heinous crime to want to prove yourself and get what you deserve? To her, there was nothing wrong with aspiring for success. Edel couldn't understand how someone could live like that without becoming a mess. Countess Ladrick retorted that it was nothing compared to how men conducted business outside. The Marchioness snapped that Lady Oberon was just a woman picking up the pieces of a mess her husband couldn't handle. They should all be fighting for what was theirs, not stabbing each other in the back. Ladrick's sly posse chuckled, implying that the Marchioness saw herself in Lady Oberon. Half the room agreed with the hostess. Only Edel stood by the Marchioness's side. After the chaotic tea party, Edel caught up with the Marchioness. She asked if she could have a moment of her time. Edel admitted that she was wrong to pity her then, because she didn't know that the Marchioness was stronger than anyone present. She wanted to be like her, so she requested to visit her occasionally. Barbara was delighted to hear this, as she also wanted to continue their conversation. And so, they quietly became the closest of friends. Perhaps the Marchioness cared for her more than anyone else on Earth. If Edel had truly listened to her back then, many things might be different now. Barbara had yelled for Edel to get rid of the manipulative people trying to control her. But if Edel disobeyed her father's orders, she would die. The Marchioness said all she had to do was ask for help, and she would handle the rest. That was the last time they saw each other. Edel's heart was heavy with sadness and grief, as if crushed by tons of memories. She whispered an apology to Barbara. Lady Bohun asked if it was true that Edel had called the girl to see the Count. Mina nodded, saying it was in the daytime parlor, but the former Duchess left quickly, so it shouldn't be anything serious. The housekeeper felt there must be a reason behind it. Even Celia was speaking up for her. The headmaid decided it was time to discipline Edel, Celia, Layla, and Daisy. Those brats needed to learn some manners. Mina remembered hearing the servants complaining about having to clean with ice water, and rumors had even begun to spread, but she kept denying it. Hot water was a privilege for her and Lady Bohun. Still, by selling the Count's belongings, all the cash was quickly replenished, but the housekeeper told them to keep their mouths shut. If the mistress found out, it would be a disaster. But Mina was sure she wouldn't care. Lady Bohun smiled smugly. It was true. After all, Lady Lane only trusted her, and the Count was never here. The old maid was practically running the mansion already, just needed to wait a little longer. Edel slipped the letter to the butler. Celia was going crazy. How long would this endless laundry work go on? They were forced to do these meaningless chores. What was the housekeeper up to again? Probably whispering in Lady Lane's ear, as usual. The laundry supervisor was right. Lady Bohun made a suggestion, and the mistress agreed. The mansion had to run like clockwork after that deep cleaning. Daisy was covered in bruises. Because the housekeeper was always stirring up trouble, there was endless work. Daisy realized she had been here for a month and hadn't even seen the shadow of a guest. She guessed it was because of those unsavory rumors about the Count. Edel had thought so too, at first. But judging by his kindness and everyday demeanor, the guy wasn't as bad as some people thought. Daisy felt that even without guests, they had a mountain of work because Miss Linnea was there. The young maid said that she was currently talking to the Count's sister. Things got bad when the young lady was in a foul mood, as she would meddle in every servant's business. It was said that the Count had been making a killing since he was very young, and thanks to that, he and his brother had never gone hungry. Daisy couldn't understand why young Miss Linnea was so clueless when her own brother had worked his butt off to earn that noble title. Edel found herself thinking it was as if she had traded lives with the Count and the young lady. At least she had finally learned how to do laundry in this mansion, something she had been completely ignorant of before. This was their first experience of high society life. The protagonist guessed that they might simply not know how to act like proper nobles. It seemed the Count never really cared about the affairs of the estate. All the real power was in the hands of the housekeeper. A whole bunch of maids had quit because of her, but since the Count would give excellent recommendations, they always took their anger out on the young lady. He seemed intimidating, but he was a decent man. Edel realized the Krisis family was facing a real mess. As long as Emperor DeMarcus Tuberin's power remained firm, Count Laszlo Krisis needed to do his part. Therefore, the Count needed to find a capable aide as soon as possible. For example, he could perhaps get married. Whoever ended up becoming Count Krisis's wife, the protagonist only hoped she would be lenient towards her. The next day, Miss Linnea sent for Edel. The girl was eager to see what the former Duchess looked like, but Linnea didn't look anything like her brother. The protagonist calmly stated that she was just Edel now, and the Lancaster family was no more. But Linnea snapped impatiently, "Yes, I understand." Thinking about the young lady's age, Edel guessed she was around 20 years old. Then she blurted out, how did you end up marrying that 60-year-old Duke Lancaster in the first place? Unfortunately, Edel hadn't been able to choose who she married. The young lady started ranting, while a soft smile spread across the protagonist's face. Linnea didn't even bother being polite. How could you sleep with someone so old? She retorted that the Duke had had a mistress, and Edel had never even shared bed with him. Linnea was taken aback when she heard that the mistress had managed the Duke's funds for the rebellion and was now possibly dead. The Count's sister completely misunderstood the role Edel had played in that house. Our protagonist had desperately tried to prove her worth. If she handled things properly and did her job well, she would definitely do better. But Edel had been just for show, meant to maintain the family's polished image. The protagonist cursed her past self in her mind for being a complete fool, then smiled. But young Linnea didn't grasp the meaning behind it. The blonde girl looked down on her too. To Linnea, Edel was basically a slave now, unable to act like a respected earl's daughter anymore. But the protagonist didn't understand why she was suddenly flaring up. Linnea was furious that this maid dared to look down on her. She ordered Edel to kneel at once. Linnea couldn't comprehend how a mere servant dared to look down on her mistress. Edel immediately apologized and knelt. She had been standing before because no one had told her to sit. But the Count's sister hadn't expected a former Duchess to be so compliant, so she asked if she had no pride left at all. Edel reminded her that she was no longer a Duchess. Now, just how much was noble pride worth anyway? Miss Linnea was the protagonist's mistress, so in this situation, her knees weren't worth much. Edel wondered what true pride and honor really were. But Linnea suddenly questioned how a mere servant dared to defy her. The young mistress's voice turned into a shriek. She knew all too well that nobles only wanted to mock others. Edel realized she had projected the image of all nobles onto herself. At that moment, the Count's sister yelled at the woman to get out of her room immediately. This girl was at the center of the chaos the protagonist had narrowly escaped. Linnea could have remained innocently sweet. For some reason, the girl reminded Edel of someone from her memories. Her sister. The child had cried, saying she couldn't take it anymore. Edel had tried to comfort her, but her sister had pushed her hand away. The protagonist hadn't expected that at all. In Lynn's eyes, her older sister could handle it, because she was a completely different person. Lynn had had enough. Now, her life was meaningless. Edel's sister was gone. Lynn Canning walked out, leaving the protagonist alone. The Canning family's story wasn't much of a legend, beginning with their great-grandfather, who won some land and discovered sapphires on it. He quickly became rich and presented a large sum of money to the royal court. The financially strapped royals were overwhelmed with gratitude and granted him the title of Earl. They were rich people with no sense of honor or self-respect. One day, Dustin Canning asked his youngest daughter to list the 4 great families, but the 10-year-old messed it up. Next was 12-year-old Edel, who knew all the details. The 4 families were so powerful that even the royal family couldn't ignore them. The Count coldly ordered, never forget that. It was necessary so that no one would look down on their family. Dustin Canning shouted, "We must marry into one of those families." Walking into the hallway, Lynn asked her sister, "Can I be as good as you?" The child felt she was too stupid. Edel snapped, "That's not it at all." But Lynn remembered what their father had said earlier. The blonde girl said, "Dad is just strict. He wants the best future for us." Edel took her sister's hand and suggested, "Let's not talk about this now. Let's get some cookies and study." Later, Lynn agreed to her sister's suggestion with a smile. She liked doing anything with Edel, but the butler made her return to her room. From today onwards, Miss Lynn was forbidden from eating sweets. It was all Mr. Canning's order. Lynn didn't understand, but the butler just coldly asked if Miss Lynn had finished her homework. The girl hesitated, then replied that she hadn't. Lynn immediately ran off, telling her sister, "Sister, you go ahead and have dessert. I'll go do my homework." Their father had always been strict, but now he was simply cruel. For some reason, he was only like this with his daughters. But young Edel couldn't do anything about it. The matter tormented her, weighing heavily on her heart and fueling her anger. She just wanted to grow up quickly enough to help Lynn, but she wasn't sure if marriage would really solve everything. Maybe she could become the perfect lady, and if she kept trying, even a graceful bride. Edel had to become the most outstanding bride in the empire. All she had to do was look delicate and charming, and wear that perfect smile. If she could do that, maybe Edel could bring her father the power he craved for birth. Even when Lynn was 16, her father was still yelling at her, saying her mind would make her unmarriageable. Meanwhile, her sister was already making a a name for herself in high society, showing her face everywhere. The Count hoped Lin would eventually be useful. Lin wondered if her sister would like her gift. The white bird slowly and gracefully spread its wings, ready to take flight, like an angel about to soar through the sky. Lin tearfully told her sister that she couldn't take it anymore. She just wanted to fly away like a bird, and she did. The Count coldly told Edel that Lin was dead. Edel froze on the spot, her heart stopping in shock. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Edel asked again, and the Count snapped, "Have you become as slow-witted as her?" It turned out Lin had fallen from the third-floor balcony while looking outside. That's why Dustin Canning ordered a cover-up. The family left, leaving Edel alone. The Count was furious. Another problem had barged into their lives. Adel's legs gave way, and she collapsed to the floor, pleading with Lin over and over, "Why did you do this?" Edel remembered every time Lin had said how hard life was. Lin was always crying, unsure how much more she could bear. Edel, who had regained hope after meeting Barbara, fell into despair again and eventually got married. Actually, Edel felt the same way as Lin, but Edel still had Lin, so she kept enduring. How could someone forced to live a life they didn't want, with their true dreams shattered, be okay? Edel could have helped Miss Lin, but she wasn't sure she had the right to interfere. She closed her eyes tightly, her heart heavy as lead. But what truly pained Edel was her own helplessness. By dusk, Count Krisis returned to the estate. He noticed that not even the butler came out to greet him, which was strange, as this estate was only used to meet mercenaries. Miss Linnea perked up when she saw her brother return. She had heard that today had been difficult for Laszlo. The young mistress asked him what he had done at the palace, and the Count retorted, "Why do you ask?" Miss Linnea shrugged and said, "No particular reason." Laszlo didn't understand why his sister followed him into his room. He felt she wanted to say something, but Linnea said it was nothing. The girl told him she had been invited to a tea party hosted by Viscountess Emerson. Laszlo told his sister that she didn't have to go if she didn't want to, but Linnea thought it was a perfect opportunity to wear a dress. She was just a little confused, unsure what they would actually talk about. So, Linnea asked her brother to find her a good governess. Laszlo asked if his sister promised to study hard and stop throwing tantrums. But the girl retorted, "When have I ever thrown a tantrum?" But the Count demanded she answer directly. He'd hired governesses for her before, but none of them lasted 2 weeks in this house. But that wasn't the case. Those women mocked her at first, acting all prim and proper on the surface, but calling her a walking disaster behind her back. At parties, she would hold back, but at home, she would scream her heart out. The problem wasn't her, but those spoiled teachers. But Linnea suddenly remembered the former Duchess's unusual attitude towards her. When Laszlo realized they were talking about Edel, his eyes widened. Despite her higher status, the woman showed no arrogance when ordered to kneel. Linnea just wanted to play with her, but she was so damn noble. Laszlo started yelling at his sister, asking if she understood how shameful her actions were, since they had always hated those who used their power to humiliate others. Linnea knew this very well, but she didn't understand. Didn't she have the right to act the same way? The nobles had always looked down on her, so the girl wanted to do the same, not seeing anything wrong with it. But the Count explained that she wasn't humiliating a noble. She was mocking a servant, and that was cowardly. Linnea felt like her brother didn't understand at all. To avoid upsetting him, she didn't even tell him how much humiliation she had endured, even though it almost killed her. So she called him too righteous, her voice full of bitterness. Linnea stormed out, snapping that she never wanted to see him again. The door slammed shut, and after the conversation with his sister, Laszlo was left in a confused and complicated state. He didn't even know what to do. He didn't know what he was doing, all because of the title that Snake had forced on him. The Emperor declared that Laszlo had to be an example for all the other mercenaries, and it took him a while to understand what that meant. But the mercenaries needed hope for a brighter future. Power wasn't just for protecting the Calliope forces, but for protecting everything that mattered. That was why the Emperor had reason to grant Laszlo such a high title, hoping the mercenary would one day accept his destiny. But at this moment, the hero didn't even know how to deal with his sister. He was considering looking for a governess among the guards again. But he needed to warn Linnea that this was the last time. Despite everything, the Count decided to buy her that expensive dress and necklace. He also wanted to check on Edel. He wondered if she was crying alone now. Laszlo started to consider going to apologize for his sister and her poor treatment of Edel. But he quickly changed his mind, realizing he was thinking too much about the woman. Laszlo immediately flung opened the terrace door. His face flushed slightly, but the young man's thoughts cleared. Visiting now would cause bad rumors. The violet-eyed man took a deep breath. After the victory banquet, the atmosphere had become tense. Everyone was on edge because the Lancaster ducal family had fallen too easily. They seemed tougher than the royal family itself. But it all crumbled because of that filthy beast, Laszlo Krisis. Who would have thought the royals would swallow their pride and reach out to that dirty mercenary? DeMarcus Tuberin had also emerged from the battlefield, the man put forward to replace the emperor. If DeMarcus took that throne, they were all done for. But it wasn't time yet. The time wasn't right. If the three great families made a move, they would be caught and charged with treason. Marquis Delane asked about the family that had suddenly become rich. Duke Barrington remembered it was Count Canning whose daughter was given to that smug mercenary Krisis. Marquis Windblower sneered, saying that the Count was the kind of man who would sell his own daughter for profit. That little clue might lead them somewhere. Her father's harsh voice assaulted Edel from all directions. She snapped her eyes open, realizing it was just a nightmare. Sometimes, the heroine still found herself thinking about this and her real family. The question was, did their vast fortune truly bring them happiness? If they wanted to act like noble gentlemen, they should donate to orphanages or hospitals for the poor. But now all of that felt meaningless. A bright and sunny morning brought a pleasant start to the new day. During breakfast, the heroine overheard a maid being scolded. The woman roared that the girl needed to finish her work on time and not hold her up. But Edel knew the two worked in different areas. Still, the heroine told herself it was none of her business. Noticing Edel had finished eating, the head laundress offered to take her away. She agreed. The mansion was quieter than usual. Miss Lana had taken the head maid with her. The butler was away, and no one was in the mood to rush. Celia offered to let Edel go. Edel had been here for 2 months, so it was about time she familiarized herself with the mansion. So today, she would collect the laundry herself. The other women took over Edel's unfinished work from yesterday. Edel hesitated, but they reassured her. They remembered how difficult it had been for Edel to interact with Linnea yesterday, so they wanted to give her a little break. In the end, Edel agreed and promised to return soon. Layla told Celia she was too kind. Edel wouldn't be able to handle all that laundry by herself, so the head laundress decided to give her a break. But Edel really did need to familiarize herself with the mansion. The other maids could leave at any time, but Edel, a prize of war, was stuck here. During the most chaotic time of the mansion's deep cleaning, Edel stepped out of the laundry room for the first time. Edel knew Layla and Celia had deliberately given her a break, so she wanted to finish her task quickly and go back to help them. Now, she felt like she had truly earned some respect. Suddenly, Edel saw a maid she had seen before. Edel didn't understand why she was off duty, leisurely spent her time, while everyone else was working so hard. She wondered where the maids who were supposed to be here had gone. Edel knew a large group of people were watching the head maid, but she couldn't let others handle this. She began to wonder if Laszlo was aware of this. It seemed Edel had no choice but to stand by and watch this farce unfold. Suddenly, Edel heard the voices of several men coming from the next room. It had to be Laszlo's voice, and someone else was with him. She left before they could find her, but the mercenary still spotted her. He flung the door open, and Edel froze. He had specifically told the cook not to let anyone in, yet here was someone eavesdropping. The mercenary yelled at her, demanding to know what she was doing there. Krisis immediately recognized the former Duchess and stammered, unable to speak. "What are you doing here?" Edel remained calm and said she was just a laundry maid from the basement. She bowed and said she was here to collect his laundry, adding that she would come back another day. But Laszlo waved her off. "No, go ahead." The blonde man was utterly bewildered by the captain's decision. He didn't recognize the face until later, and when he realized it was the Duchess of Lancaster, he was completely stunned. But the man suspiciously asked if she even knew how to do laundry. Count Krisis coldly asked his subordinate if he had seen the woman's hands. They were the hands of someone who worked hard. Judging by prejudice is pointless, and Edel has never received a secret letter from her father, Lord Canyon. The blonde man was surprised the captain knew her name. Laszlo froze, realizing this. He suggested they return to their previous conversation. There was a red rat to track and a yellow fox to be wary of. Then, the Count announced he needed to head to the Imperial Palace now. While no suspicion had been aroused, the situation felt complicated. Edel wasn't in a position to say anything, so she decided to do her best. The captain approached Lord Milton and asked if he had finished his training. Edmund Milton, commander of the Imperial Knights, was currently undergoing standard guard training. Even though the Lancaster rebellion had been suppressed, no one knew what forces might rise again. Edmund believed they must always be prepared. A knight revealed that if it weren't for Count Krisis, the vice commander would have already been the captain of the guard. But Edmund believed everyone had their role. Society valued the royal guard, who served the king directly, most highly, but the two branches still worked together. The commander told him to relax, but Edmund insisted he was just doing his duty. Every move the emperor made carried significant weight. So, it wasn't hard to imagine that his appointment, as a commoner and former mercenary, wasn't a coincidence, but a reaction from the knighthood. Edmund didn't buy it. Laszlo grabbed his clothes, eager to cover the scars on his back. He chose a black shirt, buttoning it neatly, and stood by his desk. Suddenly, footsteps sounded outside the door. Laszlo barked, "Who is it?" The voice outside identified themselves as Knights of the Order, here to see the captain of the guard. After the count bade them enter, Terrace Bogarden, Angelo Vallon, and Joseph Oz immediately gave their names. Laszlo crossed his arms. "What do you want?" It felt like an abrupt and unwarranted request. The count ordered us to get straight to the point, so the three knights nervously requested the honor of training under his guidance. That's quite sudden. The count asked why they came to him with such a request. The knights were actually surprised by the commander's question. They simply wanted to become stronger, but the training at the palace was the same for everyone, so it was easy to slack off. They wanted to train under a strong individual, someone who could assess their skills without bias, which is why they thought of Count Krisis. Laszlo is the youngest captain of the Imperial Guard, and his training methods are legendary. They were also curious about how the Imperial Guard trained. One of them mentioned that the captain's door was always open to ambitious knights, but that wasn't entirely true. Laszlo had never refused anyone. It's just that the elite knights never sought help from the mercenary captain. But these knights were a mess due to their poor physique, and Laszlo didn't think they would get very far. He wasn't opposed to those who wanted to improve. The count never thought he'd hear such words from knights. Laszlo praised their enthusiasm for training and said he only had one question for now. The count wanted to know why they wanted to train at his mansion. Training at the Imperial Palace was troublesome because of the various supervisors present. The knights felt it would be strange to be trained by the captain of the guard with their own commander present. There was some rivalry between the Royal Guard and the Knights Order, so adding extra tension wasn't a good idea. Laszlo told the knights they could come next Saturday at 3 p.m. Happy smiles immediately bloomed on their faces. Teaching the basics wasn't the biggest problem, but Count Krisis wasn't sure how much their physical skills could improve. But the genuine desire to become stronger was priceless. The butler announced that there would be guests coming over the weekend, so everyone needed to thoroughly clean their areas. But the maids weren't thrilled about it. Mrs. Becky added that the laundry room needed to take down the winter curtains and prepare the fresh spring curtains. But the mansion had over 150 curtains, and in winter they took a long time to dry, but the butler claimed it wasn't her problem. The laundry room was swamped with washing, and it was unclear if their staff could properly receive the guests. Edel couldn't figure out what had suddenly gotten into Count Krisis. A few days later, Laszlo finally decided not to go to the Imperial Palace. The Count ordered the carriage to Grani Street, a high-end district lined with magnificent aristocratic mansions. Marquis Celestine's butler greeted Lord Krisis, dressed in fine clothes. Marquis Celestine hurried out to greet the Count, saying they had finally met. Laszlo thanked him for the invitation. Shortly after, the Marquis's mother, Barbara, came over. With a warm smile, she said to dispense with the lengthy titles and just call her by her name. Laszlo bowed and gave his name, but the Marchioness knew he was the head of the family, so she insisted on addressing him as Count. Laszlo thought it best to avoid awkward titles that might stiffen the atmosphere. Barbara agreed, as expected of the head of the family. Laszlo was a tough one. Eventually, our heroes found themselves seated at the table. Count Krisis wondered if such hospitality, with that kind of butler and meticulous attention, was possible in his own mansion. But he quickly realized it was absolutely impossible. The Marchioness took a sip of tea and addressed the Count first. With a slightly worried look on her face, the lady inquired in a genuinely curious tone how Edel was doing. How could a noblewoman become a maid so easily? This was precisely why Laszlo accepted the invitation. conversation. A month had passed since Edel's reply, so Count Krisis was well aware of the true purpose of this meeting. The Marchioness decided to lay everything out for the Count. Although he had been keeping an eye on the Emperor's movements, his mother, Barbara, wanted to meet with Count Krisis in person. Laszlo had to know why. There were three factions in high society: the royalists, dedicated to strengthening the Emperor's control, and the old nobility clinging to their power. Then there were the neutralists, who remained completely uninvolved. The Marquis had shifted his stance, not only because of Miss Edel, but also out of a desire to better understand the Emperor and Count Krisis. Laszlo wasn't sure if he should thank her for attempting this conversation. Barbara said she had read Edel's letter that the Count had sent. Edel didn't want to bother anyone, but working in the laundry must have been cruel for her. So the Celestine family couldn't leave the innocent Edel in that situation. But until the rumors died down, she would remain a servant. The Marchioness wanted to know what would happen next, and Laszlo frankly said he was still considering it. So he asked Barbara what she was willing to do for Edel. A puzzled look flashed across the lady's face. Meanwhile, Count Krisis, with a serious expression, awaited the answer from the friend of the former Duchess who worked under him. Barbara was prepared to do whatever it took. Laszlo grinned and said they would get along well. Of course, love knows no age, but Barbara jokingly told the Count to find a lady his own age. The Count found himself thinking that Edel could certainly live here happily and contentedly. Laszlo was sure things would turn out that way. The next day, at the Krisis mansion, Miss Linnea stared in dismay at the man before her. He told her that the Count had been urgently summoned by the Emperor, so she must entertain the guests and show them around. Linnea couldn't understand how this could be. Knights were coming to the house today, but her brother was absent, and this was her first time hosting a tea party. With Laszlo gone at this crucial moment, she had absolutely no idea what to do. Linnea tried to imitate what she had seen before, but wasn't sure she was doing it right. She was afraid of being laughed at again. But the head maid chuckled and told the young lady not to panic, that everything would go smoothly as long as someone she trusted was there. She suddenly ordered loudly, "Bring Edel Lancaster here at once." The woman clearly knew all about tea parties. Edel rushed into the young lady's room, and Linnea nervously urged her to come in quickly. The butler suggested that the young lady put Edel in charge of entertaining and handle everything. Showing the guests how a former Duchess entertains is, I dare say, quite the accomplishment. Even with the butler in the room, Linnea called out to Edel. But now, Celia could watch the Duchess fidget. Linnea knew the laundry work wasn't easy, so Edel would be closely assisting today. 3 Imperial Guard Knights were arriving soon, and her brother was still absent, so she would have to greet them as soon as they arrived. Linnea wasn't sure if she should meet the guests. Greeting at the front door was usually the butler's job, but since he was unavailable, the head maid would have to step in and lead the guests to the drawing room. Celia reluctantly admitted that Edel didn't know her way around things. Linnea asked if she should stay in the drawing room. "The knights are not titled, and since you, miss, are acting as head of the household, it is proper etiquette to appear after their arrival." The Count's sister permitted Edel to serve refreshments at the appropriate time when the guests appeared. Linnea's spirits lifted when the former Duchess announced she was going directly to the kitchen. It meant Edel would handle everything with her usual competence. She rushed into the hallway, clutching her head. One moment she was fine, the next she felt nauseous, but she had to hold on until she could see the guests off. Linnea glanced at the clock, realizing time was running short. As the sister of the head of the household, she had to handle this. Edel entered the room and informed her mistress that the guests had arrived, so she decided to greet them. But before that, the maid made a suggestion. Edel asked for a handkerchief and powder. Linnea quickly picked them up and handed them to the blonde woman so she could begin at once. The Count's sister didn't understand what she was doing. She had already applied makeup this morning, and everything looked fine in the mirror. Emma had gone to great lengths for the guests, but the former Duchess still wanted to make some adjustments. After everything was ready, Linnea stared at the mirror in surprise. She looked much more dignified now, so she asked Edel to add more powder. But that kind of powder wasn't suitable for young, unmarried ladies. Young girls should show their natural complexion. Edel tried to explain that using makeup to feign a blush would invite gossip. People would think the young lady was trying to entice men. Linnea froze when she heard this. Now she understood why everyone had been giving her strange looks. She had been applying this powder to her face every day. Emma had said it was all the rage in high society, but Edel grabbed her shoulders, trying to calm her down, saying everything was all right. Just don't do it anymore. The Count's sister began to see the former Duchess Lancaster in a whole new light. It was time to greet the guests. Linnea had to step up as the head of the household. A flicker of fear crossed the young lady's face, but she wasn't going to back down. She offered to go with Edel. They stopped before a large door. Edel told her not to worry. Nobles always deferred to those of higher standing. Right now, Miss Linnea, you're the highest-ranking person here. The girl didn't understand why Edel was saying this. The last time, she had treated her so poorly. The blonde woman was nothing more than a servant on standby, like Emma. Edel told the young lady to look down on the knights, to make it clear that she was in charge. Here, the woman's words calmed Linnea. Now she was ready to greet the guests. That same morning, in the Emperor's study, DeMarcus Tuberin was pondering why so many rebels were now crawling to him, begging for forgiveness. He ordered Count Laszlo to deal with the matter. All these people mentioned the previous emperor, begging for mercy. No ruler had ever enjoyed the love and support of the nobles as much as DeMarcus's father. People clearly missed those days, but that emperor was an incompetent ruler. He turned a blind eye to the nobles' corruption and focused only on his own pleasures. After his death, DeMarcus swore he would never be like his father. He would drag this country out of the decaying mire. He was determined to restore justice to this land. Rebels shouldn't be pardoned just because they were nobles. The empire had its own laws, and many even welcomed harsher punishments, something DeMarcus fully agreed with. Competent people were few and far between. Even Count Krisis, who had visited Marquis Celestine's estate, hadn't reported the matter to the emperor. Few knew how deep the relationship between Barbara and Edel was. The emperor asked how the meeting with Laszlo had gone. According to our intelligence, the invitation came directly from a Marchioness. The count was likely testing the waters of a neutral faction. Edel had been a maid for 2 months. A short time, not enough to be completely smitten, but enough to cause some ripples. The emperor wondered how the count would report and whether he would mention Edel's pitiful situation. Miss Linnea of the Krisis family confidently walked into the drawing room. She gave the knights a sly smile and asked, "How long have you been waiting for me?" Then she introduced herself and thanked the gentleman for coming all the way to her estate. The knights immediately began showering Miss Linnea with compliments on her beauty. She explained that her brother had been delayed by an unexpected summons from the royal palace. The young lady quickly invited the knights to sit down. Still somewhat flustered in the presence of nobility, they hurriedly thanked her in unison. Linnea's words flowed endlessly. The door creaked open, and Edel entered. The young lady explained that she had specially prepared tea and snacks, and sincerely hoped the gentleman would enjoy them. Linnea was excited to be hosting her first tea party at the estate. She watched in surprise as Edel poured the tea. The girl couldn't believe that this was all the food there was. Linnea's previous claims had been somewhat different, so she was guessing how the guests would react, but all eyes were on Edel. She finished her task and headed for the door. Suddenly, one of the knights said he needed to freshen up before eating, which was the code for wanting to slip away. Linnea was about to call a servant, but he refused. The knight felt that since he could ask the maid, there was no need to call someone from the other side of the castle. Another knight chimed in, wanting to accompany his companion. Linnea began to wonder if it was incredibly rude to leave their host like this. She really hoped the knights weren't making fun of her. She prayed inwardly for Edel to return quickly. She told them to follow her. Angelo Vallon and Joseph Oz caught up with her in 2 seconds. They had never imagined being so close to the beautiful former Duchess of Lancaster. Now Edel finally understood why they wanted someone to lead the way. She pushed the knight away. Edel pointed to the men's restroom and added that she would take them back to Miss Linnea in the drawing room afterward. The knights were taken aback by the maid's noble demeanor. They made her escort them all the way to the front door. Joseph touched the girl's face and said, "A lowly maid has no right to ignore the orders of an imperial knight." But no one had the right to treat Edel like that. She explained that the imperial knights were the most respected order of knights in the Pespera Empire. Now, after visiting the commander's mansion, these knights were harassing the maids. Their behavior was utterly despicable. Edel demanded the knights' names. She needed to know which families these men came from. Clearly, they lacked proper upbringing. Harassing a maid in the commander's house was a blatant slap in his face. Edel hoped this would be enough to make them back down. Angelo Vallon and Joseph Oz were furious that a mere maid dared to talk back to them, but Edel wasn't the type to stay silent about this. The blonde maid was precisely the person they couldn't afford to dismiss. so she would undoubtedly report everything to the Count. Edel told them to stop immediately, or they would be fired. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the drawing room was incredibly tense. Lana sincerely hoped Edel would return soon. Joseph abruptly grabbed the maid's arm and snapped, "How dare you speak to me like that?" He had given her a chance, but clearly, words weren't working. Edel tried to pull away, but Joseph ordered Angelo not only to follow her, but to finally shut her up. As he roared, "Sit still and don't move," Edel stared at him with wide eyes. Time seemed to stop the moment the knight raised his sword. But right next to him, a dagger whistled through the air with a hint of cold wind, embedding itself deep into the wall. The knights froze instantly. Count Krisis was walking towards them. Laszlo gritted his teeth and asked, "Is this why you insisted on training at my estate?" Joseph immediately released the maid. Edel stood up and bowed to the Count. Fury burned in Laszlo's eyes. The knights hastily defended themselves, claiming the woman had seduced them and begged to be taken away. The Count asked Edel if this was true. The knights swore they weren't lying, so the captain of the guard decided to have them beheaded. They had to be punished for their lies. Laszlo had heard the filthy conversation echoing through the vast hallways of his mansion from the very beginning. He drew his sword, staring coldly at the knights. They fell to their knees, begging for forgiveness, saying they had never seen such a beautiful woman and were momentarily bewitched. The Count asked Edel, "What do you want to do with them?" Edel hadn't expected him to ask her what to do, so she said they should be dealt with according to military law, but Laszlo couldn't remember all the details. Edel explained that they would face expulsion from the knighthood, whipping, and a fine. There had been a case where the commander of the Imperial Knights had chopped off a knight's right hand. Suddenly, one of the knights shouted, "Lord Edmund Milton will explain everything." Although they tried to hide behind the vice commander, Laszlo ultimately decided to let them live. The men were tied up. Count Krisis finally turned to the laundry maid and asked, "Why are you in this part of the mansion?" Edel mumbled something in response. Laszlo's eyes widened when he saw the woman's condition. The Count froze for a moment, just as Edel's legs gave way and she collapsed before him. He rushed to her side, shouting her name. The incident at Krisis Manor spread like wildfire among all the servants. At that moment, the head maid was standing in the hallway, and Count Krisis scolded her in front of all the other servants. Laszlo couldn't understand how she managed the estate. The Count asked Mesa if he had mentioned the woman's identity. The butler said that he himself had called her a prisoner. He coldly replied that Edel was a gift from the Emperor. The butler tried to explain that all orders came from Miss Linnea, but the headmaid's main job was to monitor the Krisis sisters' every move. Laszlo assured the butler that if Edel didn't recover, the Imperial Knights would take her away. Everyone involved had to keep their mouths shut. Emesa had absolutely no idea what was so special about this Edel Lancaster. It didn't matter, even if the prisoner was sent by the Emperor himself. The entire estate was now in chaos because of her. The vice commander of the Imperial Knights had just arrived at the estate. He quickly greeted Count Krisis. It had been a long time since the old friends had seen each other. Edmund Milton was truly sorry that they had met Count Krisis under such unfortunate circumstances. Laszlo cut the pleasantries short and got straight to the point. The vice commander explained that military law stated that harassing servants was a serious offense and would be severely punished. The knights were certain that Lord Krisis would bail them out, but Milton added that the solicitation itself wasn't illegal, so they were expelled from the knighthood. Laszlo sneered when the knights started yelling about how unfair it was. Edmund Milton told the scum that they should be grateful they didn't get something worse. The commander was thoroughly intimidated, and the former knights began begging for a second chance. They pleaded for mercy, saying she was just an ordinary maid. Suddenly, Edmund Milton brought up the maid who was once a duchess. He wanted to apologize to her on behalf of the knighthood. Laszlo's expression turned grim upon hearing this request. The vice commander said he meant no harm. Apologizing was the only thing he could do. Joseph yelled that this was all Edmund Milton's fault. He had personally suggested that the three knights ask Captain Krisis to take them for training. The vice commander had said with his own mouth that they could meet the woman at the mansion, and if they couldn't, they wouldn't have come. The knights couldn't believe they had been used, and they demanded to be released immediately. Edmund smiled slyly and said that if the captain heard this now, he might misunderstand. He suggested they go and learn under Count Krisis. The vice commander had done this because the knights kept mentioning Count Krisis. Edmund suggested summoning anyone who had heard the conversation. As Laszlo suspected, Edmund was instigating those idiots, but without proof, he couldn't do anything. So, the Count let the vice commander go back and promised to convey his apologies to the maid. Edmund smiled and asked if there was anything else he could do, but Laszlo said no and told the vice commander to be careful on his way. On his way back, Edmund turned towards the carriage, his face instantly contorted with rage. How dare that idiot act so smug in front of him? The captain's position should have been his. Edmund, a nobleman who lived by honor, had his position stolen by a lowly mercenary. The emperor, in his leniency, granted that idiot a title. To add insult to injury, Laszlo even received a war relic. Edmund Milton thought it wasn't worth his time, but now he was intrigued. The heroine slowly opened her eyes. At first, she didn't recognize where she was. Seelie was anxiously sitting beside her. As soon as Ethel opened her eyes, she sat up. Ethel immediately asked, "How did I get here?" Seelie waved her hand to silence her. "We'll talk later." "My goodness, you almost died." Seelie explained that Daisy had been taking care of her until now. The Count had already sent someone for a doctor, which Ethel found strange. At any time, she would prefer hot water to a doctor. The head laundress suddenly apologized to her, causing Ethel to blink in confusion. Seelie thought that she shouldn't have listened to the head maid's nonsense. Then none of this would have happened. Even when Ethel was called to Miss Linnea, she didn't stop her. Seelie thought that greeting guests was much better than doing laundry, but the heroine reminded her that she had lost count of how many times Seelie had stood up for her, and she was deeply grateful for it. But Seelie only did it to annoy Mrs. Bohillon. Many maids came and went, but the head maid was always the one to blame. To survive, Ethel had to endure all of this. Seelie wanted to help her and form a real connection with her, but she always saw Ethel as just another ordinary maid. She tried to convince herself that the former Duchess could handle it, but the heroine said that wasn't true because only here had she found friends like them. Ethel was certain that she had survived until now, all thanks to them. Seelie held the heroine's hand. She thanked Ethel for saying so. The girl suggested they continue to look out for each other in the future. A happy smile bloomed on the heroine's face. Soon after, Daisy and Layla joined them. This time, the food they shared with their friends tasted like a sumptuous feast. If happiness had a flavor, it must have been as sweet as the piece of fruit in Ethel's hand. The girls chatted for a long time. 3 days passed. At Krisis Manor, the head maid had 2 weeks' wages deducted as punishment for turning a blind eye to the chaos in the manor. Miss Linnea was confined to her room. Daisy told her friend to be strong and come back soon. Before entering Count Krisis's office, the heroine took a deep breath to calm her nerves. Then she pushed the door open. Laszlo turned abruptly at the sound. He locked eyes with the heroine, silently scrutinizing her for a moment. Silence filled the room. Ethel wondered why the Count remained silent. Laszlo was furious that the 2 idiots hadn't been executed. His anger was justified. Being humiliated for a lowly servant was enough. Ethel apologized for her actions. Many nobles have been put in difficult situations because of scandals involving their servants. But Laszlo just looked confused. "What are you talking about?" The man didn't understand what she could have possibly done wrong. The responsibility lay with the head maid and Miss Linnea, who had failed in their basic duties. Ethel reminded him that Miss Linnea was young and had no choice. She was too inexperienced to know how to receive guests. It was her first time. Anyone in her position would have felt scared and anxious in such an unfamiliar situation. After all, a young lady wasn't Count. Laszlo couldn't believe Ethel was now defending her. The heroine pleaded with the Count to be lenient with the young, inexperienced lady. She didn't want him to lose a sister like she had. Laszlo agreed with Ethel. If he had thought things through a bit more, nothing would have happened, and no one would have been punished. The heroine reminded them that it was the knight's fault, not the Count's. The man sat down and told Ethel that from now on, she would work in the kitchen. Laundry work wasn't suitable for her. Ethel was saddened that she could no longer work with Seelie and Layla. Laszlo noticed her unhappiness. The lady asked if there was any other punishment besides this, which caught the Count off guard, leaving him stunned for a moment. The blonde girl asked in confusion, "Isn't this how it's done in noble families? They usually punish the maid even if it wasn't her fault, to preserve the family's reputation. Laszlo snapped. Do you take me for an idiot? Now the Count understood why those bastards had been so arrogant. They thought they were untouchable. Laszlo could barely contain his fury. He reminded Ethel, I'm a mercenary. I know nothing about the customs of nobles, so you just do as you please. Don't feel pressured. At first, Count Krisis seemed like a ruthless fellow, but despite his appearance, he might be more sensible than other nobles. Edel mustered her courage and asked the Count if the other maids could use hot water. Laszlo blinked. You've been washing clothes in cold water in this freezing weather. Edel nodded. Bathing too. She was surprised he even knew about it. The woman raised an eyebrow. You didn't forbid the use of firewood for heating. It turned out Laszlo had ordered everyone to conserve all supplies because he didn't want the maids using cold water. He just never actually said they could use hot water in the dead of winter. Laszlo hadn't even asked the housekeeper about it. The Count realized he was the absolute worst master of the house and promised to make sure everyone had hot water from tomorrow onwards. He grinned, thanking Edel cheerfully. The maid stared at him, surprised, and then smiled. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. Honestly, he looked kind of cute. As promised, Laszlo fixed the laundry in the bathrooms, and firewood was stocked up until summer. The maids were ecstatic to have hot water. Seeing their happiness, the protagonist was all smiles. The door was flung open, and the housekeeper stormed in, demanding to know who was slacking off. Boyan thought, Edel only cares about her own comfort, completely unaware of how much others have suffered because of her. Because of her, two women were in real trouble. Edel had suddenly been promoted, just because the Count had glanced at her. Still, they weren't going to hold a grudge against Edel for such a small matter. After all, they had hot water thanks to her. The housekeeper froze when she heard this. She had just learned that the Count had recently visited the laundry room and was surprised that they were washing clothes in cold water, even in the middle of winter. The housekeeper told everyone to wait while she personally asked the Count. They had initially assumed the housekeeper herself preferred using cold water, but she refuted this, saying it was likely a misunderstanding. But Edel had just heard the whole story directly from the Count, so now they could just be happy. The housekeeper flew into a rage, convinced that Edel had deliberately complained to the Count to undermine her position. The housekeeper snapped that if Edel dared to touch the vegetables, she would make her pay. The protagonist told the head chef that she couldn't wait to start working with them. The housekeeper was sure Edel had completely lost her mind. The blonde thought the master of the manor and his staff might have always been under someone's thumb, but Edel was the only one they couldn't fire, so if things went south, she could report everything. At that moment, Lana was slumped in her room. She was sure Edel had given up on her too. She just needed a call for help. It turned out the young lady was right. She could never become a true noble. Lana was sure everything was over now. Just then, the head chef called out to the protagonist. Edel focused, peeling potatoes carefully with a small smile. Lola scolded a woman for not washing the pots yesterday. When the protagonist reminded her it wasn't her responsibility, she started to protest. Edel just added with a genuine smile, "There's no need to be sneaky, just do your duties honestly." She asked Lola not to forget to finish today. Edel wasn't going to be the pushover maid anymore. A while later, the protagonist finally finished her work and breathed a sigh of relief. She decided to take a break before preparing dinner. The kitchen work was just as hard as the laundry. Edel increasingly felt that meeting Celia and Layla in the laundry room was the luckiest thing that had happened to her, but she had to keep working hard for her friends. The blonde hadn't realized she'd fallen asleep until she heard voices outside the door. Madame Bone cheerfully asked Bovex, "Why are you trembling so much?" "It's not the first time, don't worry." The man said, "The atmosphere here is off." The woman snapped that if this continued, she would change to a new supplier. But Bob here promised to handle everything, and the housekeeper praised him, saying he would never lose money working with her. The protagonist realized they were embezzling funds. The merchant hesitated to sign the documents, but the housekeeper's smug attitude gave everything away. They were definitely misappropriating the manor's funds. Edel swore she would catch them red-handed this time. She heard the housekeeper's footsteps already on the second floor. The housekeeper probably put the receipts in Count Krisis' office and slipped away while no one was looking. Laszlo was working, so the office was empty. The protagonist slipped inside. She silently apologized to the Count, but this raid was her only chance to catch these crooks. No sooner said than done. Edel quickly grabbed the shop receipts. The receipts claimed all the vegetables were high quality, but they were actually all garbage. They knew the lord of the manor was clueless about quality grades, so they could skim off the top and get away with it. Edel wondered where the ledger recording all these dealings might be. People like them always kept records. They were so obsessed with money, they wouldn't miss a single penny. It was possible they were embezzling much more than just supplies. Without warning, a girl's voice asked, "Who's there?" Miss Linnea was startled to see Edel in the hallway. Edel froze as if struck by lightning, unsure how to react to Linnea's sudden appearance. Her mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. She needed to say something quickly. Edel calmly greeted the young lady, but Linnea rushed over and sharply asked, "What are you doing here?" Edel decided to say only what was necessary. She told the young lady she had been worried about her. "I heard Count Krisis punished you for that messy business," Edel said. "I was worried about your well-being." The situation was desperate. She knew Edel had been frightened then, too. Edel still remembered how badly Linnea's hands had trembled before the knights appeared. Linnea said she was fine. The young lady knew it was Edel who had asked her brother to shorten the confinement. Edel hesitantly said she had only asked, and he had agreed, but apparently no one had ever dared to do so before. But Linnea was about to say something else. Edel was taken aback when Linnea suddenly thanked her. The young lady blushed, deeply embarrassed to utter the words, but it was absolutely necessary. To change the subject, Linnea abruptly asked Edel if she knew Viscountess Emerson. Edel nodded, and the young lady said she had just received a second invitation to her party. A flicker of surprise crossed Edel's face. Angela had praised Camilla's lavish hall decorations, but the lady had told her to wait. The real highlight was yet to come. She had revealed that she'd invited Linnea Krisis. Camilla's cousin had said the party would be much more interesting now. Miss Linnea's voice held a note of hope as she asked Edel if she thought she could become friends with Viscountess Emerson. Linnea needed at least one true friend now. Edel completely understood how she felt. She suggested waiting until the third meeting, as people usually just got to know each other during the first two. Linnea was glad she had asked Edel for advice. It suddenly occurred to the girl that they had met 3 times now. She was very curious about what the former Duchess Lancaster thought of her, but she could never muster the courage to ask. Edel explained to the young lady that true friendship took time and sincere effort, but when you found a kindred spirit, you would just know. Linnea wondered if she would ever find such a person. Then she dismissed the maid. The next day, before Miss Krisis hopped into the carriage, her maids wished her good luck. The carriage departed from the manor. With both the mistress and the housekeeper away, the maids decided to relax. The maids were certain the young lady would throw a fit when she returned, and if that were the case, she might as well have stayed home. Edel wondered how Linnea would look today. At least she had learned how to apply makeup properly since the last tea party. But the blonde was worried. She hadn't seen the dress yet. Edel sincerely hoped everything would go well. In the evening, the carriage returned to the manor. The head maid rushed inside and yelled at one of the maids to get to the hallway immediately. Mina and the other girls ran after her. Linnea knocked over a vase and snapped, "Who put this here?" It was already March, but the winter decorations were still up and people might get the wrong idea. The young lady also ordered someone to fetch the gardener immediately. Meanwhile, the other maids were cleaning up the broken porcelain. It turned out that after suffering some veiled comparisons, the young lady was simply taking it out on the maids. Someone brave was needed to clean the young lady's room. Edel, the main character, raised her hand. Edel went in and saw the mess Linnea had made of her room, but she didn't flinch. With precise and efficient movements, she put everything back in order. Linnea suddenly announced that they had begged her to go again tomorrow. Edel froze mid-sweep, realizing this tomorrow topic required her full attention. These people constantly tormented and ignored Linnea, but they never mocked her to her face. The girl had started to believe that it was all her fault that everyone treated her this way. Linnea hated her inability to contradict them. She thought Edel must see her the same way. Edel walked over to the young lady, placed a hand on her shoulder, and softly called her name. Edel knew she had been wronged. Linnea nodded and then promptly burst into tears. "Miss Linnea, didn't want to wash up or sleep. She knew tomorrow would be another dreadful party, but if she didn't go, rumors would spread. She didn't understand why she had to go through this. Edel asked Miss Linnea why she kept accepting all the invitations. Despite feeling humiliated, Linnea attended these events every time. She replied that if she refused, her brother would be criticized. But Linnea would be criticized whether she attended or not, which made the girl feel utterly hopeless. Miss Linnea didn't know what to do. Edel said the first step was to rebuild her reputation, which wasn't a problem at all. Edel promised to lay out the whole plan if Miss Linnea would take a hot bath to discuss it. Later, Angela and Camilla were talking about Linnea Krisis's ridiculous behavior. They invited her to the party just to quickly convey a message. She didn't belong in high society. But Angela thought Count Krisis wouldn't let this go. Camilla concluded that the fool would show up radiant again tomorrow. At that moment, Linnea was soaking in a hot bath sprinkled with rose petals, specially prepared for her by Edel. In Viscountess Emerson's eyes, the girl was nothing but a joke. Edel's first piece of advice was, pretend everything is fine, take a deep breath, and walk in. The girl was sure today would be better than yesterday. Linnea was glad she finally managed to sit down at the party safe and sound. Focus on yourself, and don't let today's chaos stress you out. The young miss needed to be more indifferent to those withering stares. Just then, Linnea considered getting a cup of tea. The musicians began to play, and the noble ladies and their partners stepped onto the dance floor. The girl felt everyone was ignoring her, but she kept telling herself she could handle it. Linnea slowly sipped her tea, realizing how wonderful it tasted, and savored every moment, even though she felt disapproving glances falling upon her. As night fell, two ladies approached the young miss with smiles. They told her the dress looked beautiful on her, highlighting her impeccable taste and style. Linnea hadn't expected this, and quickly thanked them for their compliments. The ladies even said the necklace she picked was stunning. They told Linnea to stay close to whoever helped her with her outfit today, and suggested they leave the event together. Just then, Viscountess Emerson walked up to Lady Licio and Lady Brunin and asked if they were enjoying the party. The ladies said they enjoyed it, but were ready to leave. Mrs. Emerson tried to persuade the nobles to stay a little longer, but they refused. Then, the Viscountess turned to Miss Krisis and asked the same question. Linnea said it was getting late, and she was leaving too. The woman raised an eyebrow and asked if she really wasn't enjoying the event. Linnea smirked and said she'd been having fun since yesterday. The ladies had no idea what was going on, and Viscountess Emerson was dumbfounded by her audacity. Lady Licio and Lady Brunin praised Linnea for clapping back at Camilla Emerson like a boss. They told her to keep up those fiery responses, but honestly, Linnea was just improvising and hadn't given it much thought. The noble ladies waved goodbye to Miss Krisis, vowing to see her again soon. Linnea's heart was pounding. Earlier, Edel had asked who picked out the dress and necklace. Linnea said she did, and Edel high-fived her, praising how elegant she looked. If she could confidently carry off this outfit, she would outshine everyone. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Emesa always claimed she was too young and knew nothing about fashion, so high society would never take her seriously. But the housekeeper was dead wrong. Linnea's style was much sharper, and she knew how to highlight her best features. Edel told her to look in the mirror, and Linnea almost gasped when she saw her reflection. Trusting Edel was the wisest decision ever. That night, when Edel was summoned to the Count's office, she nearly lost her mind. The master of the manor apologized for calling Edel in so late and told her that from tomorrow onwards, she would be his sister's exclusive maid. Edel was caught off guard by the news, but there was no one else in the mansion more suitable than her. Count Krisis apologized again for calling the young lady to his office so late. He insisted it was Linnea's idea. Laszlo chuckled as Edel waved it off as no big deal. He bluntly told his sister that if she caused any more trouble, he wouldn't spare her. Edel had never seen Linnea smile like that. It was the first time Count Krisis had called his little sister by a nickname, and Edel's heart skipped a beat. Edel pressed her hands to her chest, silently pleading with her sister, Lynn Canning, to let her take care of Miss Linnea this time. She hoped Linnea Krisis could be cherished and grow up freely like this. She swore she wouldn't look back and regret it. Edel and Lynn shared an awkward yet sincere sisterhood. They had truly been each other's support. Since childhood, although the protagonist had several brothers, they hadn't interacted much, almost like strangers. Perhaps because of this, they knew that after the wedding, no matter what happened, they would eventually part ways, forming different families and living different lives. When Edel refused to marry, her brothers even scolded her. Now that Lynn was gone, Edel had no choice but to immediately agree to this marriage with Lancaster. Count Krisis told Edel that her new room was next to Linnea's. It was getting late, so Linnea promised to show her the room tomorrow. Laszlo placed his hand on his sister's head, looked directly into Edel's eyes, and said he didn't want to force her. Edel realized that this manor was now her new home. She said she would do her best, and the young lady, overjoyed that she had finally agreed, grabbed her hand. Now she was just Edel, no longer a Lancaster nor a Canning. The servants didn't expect such a dramatic change in Miss Linnea. It was all thanks to the perfect makeup. Now the young lady looked much kinder than usual, a change the housekeeper definitely didn't appreciate. It seemed Edel was truly changing Miss Linnea. Even the Count admitted that Linnea was like a different person now. He also noticed that Edel looked much better than before and told her so with a smile. Edel didn't expect to hear such words. Laszlo believed this would make things easier between her and Barbara. Edel called out to the Count, and he immediately blushed. He quickly changed the subject and suggested the young woman continue their conversation from yesterday. He planned to put a sofa and a table in his office later, as they had nowhere to sit now. Because Edel had helped his sister, the Count decided to thank her personally. But Edel replied that she hadn't done it for a reward. A promotion would be enough, thank you. Laszlo knew his sister wasn't easy to handle, so he asked her to at least accept this. Compared to what Edel had done, it was nothing. Last night, Linnea had rushed into his office and started begging him to give Edel to her, catching the man completely off guard. She told him that she was the one who had dressed her. When she said it was the first time she hadn't embarrassed herself, Laszlo was stunned. Now the man understood why she had always been the way she was. Count Krisis believed that her genuinely cheerful personality, which she'd had since childhood, would help her fit into any aristocratic circle. He let her handle it herself, trusting that she could manage. Perhaps the distance between them had become too great to bridge. That was why Edel had become Laszlo's lifeline. The Count wasn't sure if the gift he had chosen would satisfy the former Duchess, so he asked her to accept a check. Edel replied with a hint of sadness that she didn't need it. Laszlo was shocked by her answer. She could at least buy some new clothes and beautiful jewelry. She reminded him that she couldn't leave the manor. The Count blinked in confusion. How can you not leave? He was taken aback when he realized Edel had been seeing herself as a prisoner and a servant here. But that wasn't the case. Laszlo had said from the beginning that he was hiring her as a maid. Edel should receive the same salary as the other maids, and the Count had started to think that was impossible. But Edel said she had already received her salary. Laszlo immediately retorted, "Then you have no reason to confine yourself to this house." Edel still couldn't believe it. Her face flushed, and her heart began to race. Laszlo had always thought of Edel as all business, but she also had a gentle side, as evidenced by her helping Linnea. But at first, Edel found it difficult to bring up Linnea's issue. She didn't know how to calm her wildly. Racing heart, Edel finally gathered her thoughts and told him she would rather not have the money. She asked him to believe that she was telling the truth. Laszlo immediately said he believed her and urged her to tell him directly what she wanted. But that is a request. Don't rush, Edel said. I only wish that Master Krisis will always believe my words. He agreed. A delighted Linnea showed Edel another party invitation, and Edel sincerely congratulated her. The young lady told Edel that the room next to hers was ready, so she could start moving her things over and begin working tomorrow. Linnea hummed a tune as she returned to her room. But before she could close the door, the housekeeper's hand stopped it. The young lady spun around and asked nervously, "Who's there?" Emesa entered, guessing Miss Linnea would be uncomfortable without her today, as it was her job to attend to the young lady. The housekeeper took out a new floral powder, but Linnea snatched it from her hand, shouting, "I don't need that." The young lady snapped at the housekeeper. "Do you think I'm a fool to let you just walk out like that?" Emesa exclaimed that the powder was recommended by another maid, but Linnea wouldn't listen, ordering the housekeeper out of her room. The housekeeper stormed into the hallway, angrily clutching her apron. This whole thing was Edel's fault, but this wasn't over. Emesa wasn't going to let this go. Daisy said tearfully that now even her sister was moving so far away, and it truly saddened her. It seemed like Edel was about to disappear but Edel was glad Daisy was so upset. Edel admitted that it felt a little awkward to be alone in such a nice room, but her friend countered that it was only natural, as men had always had nice rooms even without any position. The housekeeper assigned rooms as she pleased. Edel was quick to use this as evidence too. Daisy was curious about how her friend planned to decorate the room. Hanging small portraits on the wall is all the rage now. They say Artist Street is super popular. Honestly, Edel had never considered that. Edel suggested they visit the street next week and grab something delicious to eat together. Daisy was all for it. Edel was happy, wishing every moment could feel like this. But one day, Miss Linnea couldn't find her pearl hairpin, which she really wanted to wear today. The blonde guessed it might be in that black box, but it wasn't there, so Linnea started to wonder if she had put it somewhere else. Edel said she would check the other boxes, and a young lady offered to help. As soon as they started looking, they found many empty spaces in the box. Linnea was certain there should have been earrings and a gold necklace as well. If it were just a hairpin, it might have been Linnea's own oversight, but this was blatant theft. The young lady ordered everyone to be summoned immediately. Linnea and Edel went downstairs. The housekeeper announced that she had gathered all the servants as the young lady had commanded. Everyone had to help catch the thief. Emesa pointed at the 3 maids who took turns cleaning the young lady's room, including Emesa and Edel herself. Linnea ordered a search of all these maids' rooms, but the housekeeper said they would check the others again, just in case. Emesa thought the jewelry might be hidden in their friends' rooms. Edel told the young lady that they probably wouldn't find anything in those rooms. Linnea knew her jewelry might have already been sold, but for the sake of fairness, she was considering other angles. She needed to investigate everything thoroughly. Edel was glad her mistress had a keen intuition about this. She could be impulsive at times, but with the right guidance, she could become something. The housekeeper burst into the hall, beaming, announcing that they had found the culprit. The maids immediately began to whisper. Edel froze when the housekeeper pointed at her, declaring that the culprit was definitely her and her little group. The jewelry had been found in Daisy, Silly, and Layla's rooms. The girls were horrified by the accusation. The servants cried out that it was a mistake. They didn't even know what the young lady's room looked like. The girls fell to their knees, screaming that this was clearly a setup. Linnea herself realized how strange this was. The housekeeper pointed out that these 3 were close to Edel, and the maids weren't well off, which was a clear motive. So, Edel had stolen the jewelry and given it to her friends. Emesa blurted out, "That's how it must have happened. There's no other possibility." Linnea had to go out for something urgent, so she told everyone, Silly, Daisy, and Layla, to go back to work. The housekeeper didn't know where they were going. Back in the room, Edel asked Miss Linnea if she thought she was guilty. Linnea certainly didn't believe it, but she was curious how Edel remained so calm under such pressure. Perhaps that composure was the mark of a true lady. But Edel didn't know what to say. Edel admitted that she felt less angry and more like the moment had finally arrived. But she needed solid evidence to prove her innocence. Edel was confident in herself. She promised Miss Linnea that she would find a way to prove it, to prove that the young lady's trust in her was not misplaced. The Count learned of an incident that occurred while he was away. Edel decided to tell him everything she knew. Laszlo agreed. Edel asked the Count if he remembered when she had begged him to believe her, instead of empty promises. Laszlo certainly did, and he still believed she was innocent. But the problem wasn't the theft. Edel hadn't stolen anything. The real problem was the content of those documents, what she had compiled based on what she had seen and heard. They needed to cross-check these details with the Count's ledgers. Edel advocated for a formal investigation into Count Krisis and the Krisis family. Laszlo asked Edel if this was related to the housekeeper's accusations of theft against her. The protagonist nodded. Because of her, Emesa could no longer manipulate Miss Linnea or boss the servants around as she used to. Daisy, Silly, and Layla were implicated because Emesa wanted to eliminate everyone close to Edel. Unable to pay their dues, they were given the worst chores. Edel had been waiting for this moment. She understood Laszlo Krisis. He must have already sensed something amiss in the manor, and Edel was counting on her testimony to confirm his suspicions. But she didn't know if he would believe her. Laszlo curled his lips into a smile. "It's all my fault." The protagonist couldn't believe he'd accepted her flimsy arguments, but the Count reminded her that he had promised to trust her. He knew Edel wasn't the type to spout nonsense or chase material wealth. She was a valuable person who had broadened his, Laszlo's, horizons. but the man wanted something in return. With a smile on his face, he asked the former Duchess of Lancaster if she was ready to face the consequences. Ultimately, the accountant and the merchants were arrested. The woman kept screaming that she was innocent. Count Krisis coldly ordered the former housekeeper to confess what she had embezzled, but Amasa kept shouting that she was completely innocent. But according to the records Nathan found on Amasa born, she had been substituting inferior goods and inflating the prices of expensive items. She had been profiteering from the ladies' cosmetics and clothing. The double-entry ledgers showed the total embezzlement to be around 250,000 lint. Amasa screamed that managing the manor was a heavy burden, and she had worked so hard for the past 3 years, so everyone could turn a blind eye. The Count gave the woman 2 choices, either go to jail or sign a receipt for 400 gold coins. Amasa had messed up. The amount she stole was nowhere near that much, but the rest was compensation and the prize for her life. Now, the former housekeeper had to make a choice. Daisy excitedly asked her sister Celia if this meant all the false accusations were dropped. The girl nodded, saying they didn't have to worry anymore. But another problem arose. The housekeeper's position was now vacant, and they had to decide who would take over. Miss Lana couldn't believe they had tolerated such a housekeeper. Laszlo agreed with his sister. Then he said, for instance, the person who exposed all of Amasa's crimes could take over the position. From now on, Edel was the housekeeper. Miss Lana couldn't hide her satisfied smile. The protagonist's friends were ecstatic when they heard the good news. They were incredibly happy for Edel. Laszlo told anyone who had objections to speak up immediately. After the storm, a heavy, even oppressive silence fell over the manor. The guilty hurriedly fled the manor, while the innocent took their places. It turned out Amasa had put the poor maids in terrible rooms despite knowing there were plenty of good vacant rooms in the mansion. The friends decided to help Edel as soon as they finished moving. They would have to redistribute duties and hire new staff. Who knew what would have happened if someone else had been in Edel's place? Even though the manor was still a mess, it felt much lighter knowing Amasa was finally gone. Hearing a familiar knock, the protagonist opened the door a crack. Count Krisis apologized for visiting so late. Edel was so shocked to see Laszlo that she forgot what to say for a moment, just staring at him in a daze. The man apologized and asked to come in. After deciding to get rid of Amasa, the Count's mercenaries had searched the related companies for days, and they found the hidden double-entry ledgers. It turned out that Amasa hadn't kept any ledgers properly, so Edel would have to manage the manor from scratch. But in this mansion without a housekeeper, the protagonist didn't know how far she could go. Someone knocked on the door, and Edel thought it was her friends. It was surprising that so many people were visiting now. If someone had told Edel this would happen 3 years ago, she would have said they were boasting. It turned out to be Count Krisis. He immediately stammered in a fluster, "Don't think too much about it." But Edel wasn't thinking about any of that. The protagonist let him in and apologized to the Count because there wasn't even anything to offer him. The man told her to calm down, saying that thanks to her, Linnea had become much more lively and was constantly receiving invitations. Edel smiled and said that it was all thanks to Miss Linnea's bright and cheerful personality. Laszlo replied that she had always been like that. It was just that he hadn't understood before. In just a few months, Edel had changed everything he had been unable to do for his sister in 3 years. Now, the long-awaited peace had finally arrived. No matter how many times Laszlo thanked her, it wouldn't be enough. He told Edel that he wanted to ask for her help, not as Count Krisis, but as himself. Born as the sister of a brother like him, she had no choice. Even if Edel hated and despised him, he begged her to take good care of their sister. But Edel told the Count that she didn't see him the way he thought she did. He probably didn't want a trophy like her. A piece of art or jewelry might suit the Count better. Laszlo replied that the Emperor had given him the most precious reward. Edel looked at him in surprise. She thanked the Count for his words. Then Edel whispered that no one ever thought a traitor's wife would have the audacity to live. If the Count hadn't taken her in as a maid, she would probably be 6 feet under by now. He knew how much weight all of this put on her shoulders. But if she continued to live, good days would eventually come. So she shouldn't waste time thinking about death. Edel nodded in agreement. Tears started to fall from her eyes. They always told Edel to suppress her emotions, to hide her true feelings. Showing her vulnerability wasn't easy for her, but now she was crying, making no attempt to hide it, saying that she just wanted to live a completely normal life. Laszlo pulled a handkerchief from his pocket. Edel immediately took it. The man didn't judge her for showing weakness in front of him. He understood that it was truly difficult for her to live a normal life. The question was, what would happen if Edel cried again in front of someone who had already seen her vulnerable side? But the handkerchief he offered exuded a warm, comforting scent. Edel really wanted to live a normal life. A normal family, normal love and friendships. These had always been the most difficult and distant dreams for her. She decided that she would definitely wash the handkerchief and return it to him tomorrow. Finally, Edel slept soundly without any dreams. In the morning, she had to get ready and eat breakfast. Starting today, her new job kept her very busy. Until new staff were hired, the housekeeper reassigned duties based on the maid's requests. Although it would be hard work, Edel hoped everyone could persevere with renewed motivation. Miss Linnea also had something to say. She admitted that even though Amasa had been manipulating them behind the scenes, she had been very stressed during that time. Linnea apologized to the maids for causing them so much trouble. Now her main goal was to run Krisis Manor well. With Edel's help, they could finally give it their all without any guilt. Then she apologized to Edel's friends for not clearing their false accusations sooner. But the girls were happy to stay at the manor. The maids thanked their mistress for arranging new rooms for them. Linnea smiled happily, full of hope for everyone now working in her home. Now, Krisis Manor was starting anew. After such a stressful period, Daisy's long-awaited day off had finally arrived. So much had happened in those days, and they could finally rest. Edel was glad she had kept her promise. They walked outside, where nobles were strolling around. Daisy asked her sister where she wanted to go. Edel said she saw a clothing store, realizing she needed to buy some casual clothes. Daisy, smiling, suggested they go there first. Edel froze when she heard a passerby mention her name. She stopped and saw a dark-haired, noble woman staring at her in surprise. It was Lady Lucille Arton. The noblewoman immediately called over her friends and pointed at Edel. Daisy started to panic, but Edel told her it was okay. They just needed to say hello and keep going. A man suddenly snapped. How could a criminal show her face here? Seeing Edel in fine clothes, they assumed they were stolen. If the former Duchess had any shame, she would be 6 feet under with the other traitors. Many in Edel's position would have chosen to die with dignity. Edel calmly stated that Count Krisis had allowed her out, so they had better back off. These people were no different from Amasa. They just wanted to cause pain and watch others cry. So the key was not to rise to their bait. Edel curtsied, wishing them a pleasant walk. But the man sneered that she was clearly some mercenary's mistress, which explained her confidence. It should have been obvious when she started calling that commoner a count. Edel wondered how much more of this humiliation could she endure. Suddenly, Count Krisis appeared, saying he hadn't even realized he had a mistress by his side. The nobles immediately quieted down, dumbfounded by the captain of the guard's sudden appearance. Edel didn't understand why Count Krisis was here. In fact, it wasn't just Edel and Daisy who came here. Count Krisis and his sister, Linnea, had also decided to check out this street food stall. After becoming a nobleman, Laszlo could only eat exquisite delicacies, but this was what he truly craved. Linnea suddenly asked if it was true that they became orphans 16 years ago. Laszlo was caught off guard by the question, but the girl said she was just curious how one child could take care of another. He said they survived as best they could, but Linnea demanded he stop avoiding the question. She could no longer remember the house they lived in as children, and her parents' faces had long since faded from her memory. Linnea was too young back then, so she wanted to know more about the life she and her brother shared as children. It turned out they used to live in a comfortable and happy home, but that ordinary life was shattered in an instant. Laszlo ran desperately through the woods with his sister on his back, while she cried for their parents. He swore he would protect her at all costs. Their pursuers could catch up at any moment, so they kept running while they still had the strength. But his hands were too weak to carry Linnea any longer. If they could find a safe place to settle down, life would be much easier. One morning, a blinding light shone on Laszlo. The old woman who had given them meat pies a few days earlier found them and asked if they had been hiding here for days. The kind woman offered to take them in. Perhaps it was because of the days of running, but Laszlo instinctively felt he could trust her. The old woman said she lived with her husband and was happy to take in others. Everything Laszlo did was for a safe future with Linnea. Now, names or the past didn't matter. The children could build their own safe and happy world. After someone came to look after Linnea, Laszlo started working to make a living and slowly picked up the sword. Those elderly people took care of people with love, and the children were truly happy in their home. Linnea clearly remembered her grandfather and grandmother. She guessed her brother couldn't remember their parents either, and the man said that although their house was crowded, it was a good place. Even though Linnea couldn't remember her parents' faces, she would never forget the taste of her grandmother's meat pies. She was also starting to like the house they lived in now. Now she suggested they check out the area across the bridge. After walking so far, the siblings stumbled upon their housekeeper being publicly humiliated. Anger instantly flared on both their faces. They couldn't believe someone would speak about Edel that way. The nobles believed that a woman who willingly married an old man was incredibly dangerous. Laszlo couldn't listen anymore and immediately snapped at them. What do you think you're doing? At that time, jerks were spreading vicious rumors, completely unaware of who they were talking to. They said the captain of the guard wouldn't dare threaten anyone. But Laszlo found it strange that a commoner was behaving so politely. He declared Edel was an important member of the Count's household and demanded they apologize for the slander. Just then, Laszlo asked Edel if she remembered the names of all the jerks who insulted her. The men and women apologized to the Count on the spot and promised not to do it again. The captain of the guard didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but he wasn't sure how Edel would react. Then, the nobles bowed and apologized to her. Edel frowned, but accepted the ladies' and gentlemen's apologies. They hurried away without another word. Linnea was furious that the nobles dared to slander Edel. Daisy suddenly ran into her father. Edel explained to Linnea that they had come to have Daisy's portrait painted and had run into some acquaintances. Linnea wanted to have a portrait painted with her brother too, saying he was always being sent off to war and you never knew when he might meet an untimely end. Linnea didn't want to forget anyone she loved ever again. That kind of worry was normal for her family. But the young man hadn't realized until now how anxious Linnea was every time he left. Although Laszlo felt pathetic, he and Edel had something in common. The hardest part was pretending to live a normal life. Daisy was confused. Edel had already agreed to go somewhere with someone, but because she was standing far away, she missed the beginning of the conversation. The painter greeted the guests. A formal aristocratic portrait usually took more than a month, but the Count had heard that pastel portraits here were done quickly. Commoners began imitating the aristocratic style of portraiture. Edel thought to herself, now even the nobles wanted cheap and fast portraits. At least they finally decided to have a portrait painted, but Linnea thought her brother looked awful. He needed a shave and a decent haircut. Laszlo told Daisy she would cover the cost of the portrait herself. An artist approached the siblings and asked if he could show them around. Students could paint portraits for the ladies, and they were quite skilled, so there was no need to worry. Daisy had never had a portrait painted before. She was very nervous. Edel told them to just think of it as a relaxing outing. The former Duchess had only one portrait painted after she married the Lancaster Duke. But that painting had been burned years ago, so this would be Edel's only portrait. Before long, everything was ready. The young painter, captivated by Edel's beauty, wanted to invite her to become an actress. She refused, but he kept persuading her, saying that with her looks, tickets would sell out as soon as she stepped on stage. Laszlo put his hand on the painter's shoulder and coldly told him to paint another portrait. The Count wanted his driver, Marco, and his daughter to have a portrait together. Laszlo unexpectedly asked the painter for a second portrait, this one of Edel alone. The former Duchess was shocked by the request. The man told Edel that Duchess Celestine had been asking about her, so he wanted to send a portrait over. The blonde thanked him for his thoughtfulness. Meeting Laszlo was unexpected for Edel. She thought she was already happy, but it turned out there was hope for something even better. It had been a crazy day. The Count offered to send the girls back in a carriage, but they declined, saying they wanted to continue shopping. Laszlo's household wished them a good time. Edel suggested visiting a few more shops. Laszlo was pleased that he had successfully had his portrait painted with Linnea, given Marco a generous gift, and even gotten a portrait of Edel. The painting was meant to be sent to Duchess Celestine to let her know her friend was doing well, but Laszlo just didn't want to do it. So he wanted to keep it for himself for a while. He reasoned that sending such a thing would feel strange. After a crazy and eventful weekend, Laszlo's new staff arrived without any prior notice. Since Edel was now the housekeeper, they needed to find a personal maid for Lana. She asked her friends, but they all declined. So, the former Duchess chose 2 suitable candidates from a new and existing staff, and then she found another reliable candidate. Edel suggested dividing the items into those to be discarded and those to be sold, and Daisy asked if she could handle it. The former Duchess told her not to feel pressured and promised to help and explain everything. Daisy's eyes were full of determination, vowing to do her best. Because Lana would be interacting with all sorts of people, Daisy's kindness would help shape her character. Daisy had always only interacted with people much older than her, so the former Duchess hoped they could help each other despite their social differences. Edith said that, just as the housekeeper had mentioned, a dressmaker would be coming after lunch. Shortly after, the dressmaker arrived. Lana wanted to order a walking dress, a picnic dress, and an evening gown. The woman suggested she choose from the catalog and have her measurements taken immediately. Lana asked the housekeeper for her opinion, and the dressmaker confirmed the rumors that Miss Laszlo, Lana, relied on her head maid for everything. This meant that any dress could be sold at a high price. Lana liked one dress, but the dressmaker suggested she look at another option. It was a trendy, youthful design that was becoming popular among girls her age. Lana didn't believe the woman. Edel realized the dressmaker was trying to get rid of unsold stock. The woman tried to push a white tulle dress, but Lana slammed the catalog shut. She didn't need that one at all. She decided to order only the dress she had chosen earlier, the one she had picked out earlier. The dressmaker, confused, asked if the young lady hadn't intended to order 3 dresses just a moment ago, but Lana decided to postpone the matter. The Count's sister retorted, "Is your taste really that bad?" The woman forced a smile and suggested taking Lana's measurements now. Lana was already able to handle things on her own, quickly regaining her lost confidence, and she wasn't falling behind in her studies either. Amidst all this, Edel decided to stay by her side. Lana completed her first successful resale. Lana pointed to another item and told the merchant to add it to her tab. Lana told Edel it was a gift for her. The former Duchess raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you buying it for yourself?" she asked. Miss Lana replied, "Only those who work hard should use such things." The merchant was a gossip, so spreading this around would improve Lana's reputation. Merchants would think the young lady was considerate of her servants and a reliable business partner. Lana didn't care about the gossip. She just wanted to give the gift to Edel. The former Duchess accepted the gift, saying, "Thank you, miss," and Lana told her to be sure to use it. Now, Edel had another precious item. The former Duchess's room was filled with gifts and letters from dear friends. She decided to write about this in her diary today. Last weekend, they had gotten diaries from Gallantry, and Edel wanted more than just daily notes. She wanted a personal record. She wanted to record every created memory this way. Suddenly, Lana rushed into the room. Miss Lana took Edel's hand and said she had a request. She unexpectedly asked Edel to take care of her brother, Count Krisis. Edel's eyes widened in shock. This happened at the Brooks Manor at noon the same day. Miss Lana was once again complimented for her stunning beauty, and she quickly expressed her gratitude. Lana also complimented Jemima Brooks, who had invited her for tea. Miss Krisis was introduced to the Duchess of Brooks's granddaughter. There wasn't anyone unpleasant here. At other parties, people would still look askance at Miss Krisis, but here, everyone was friendly. Suddenly, a lady asked why the Count wasn't at the party, and Lana replied that he was incredibly busy. One of the ladies confessed that the Count seemed a bit intimidating. She asked Lana not to misunderstand. After all, as a knight of the king, he had to look imposing. The lady meant that the Count seemed cold or unapproachable. Miss Lana could help her brother, as he also needed to get married soon. It's often said that words spoken without malice reveal the truth, and now Lana understood. The real problem wasn't her. Most nobles judged by appearances and who you knew. Lana couldn't handle her brother's stubbornness, so she asked Edel to help him change so he could finally get married and make some real friends.